Hi everybody, and welcome to this session where we're going to be discussing UK-US trade. Over the last few years, there's been a lot of discussion around the US. We've obviously, when President Trump was in power, there were lots of conversations around tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, obviously US and China, the US and the EU. You know, there's quite a lot of noise. And we now have a new president, so it'll be interesting later in this session to see whether any of our panelists are seeing any differences in attitude. But to begin with, if we look at the UK-US trade, the US is our largest trading partner as a single country. It represents about 14% of our exports. It's our biggest import partner as well. And just to put some numbers around that, in 2019, we exported $69 billion of goods and services to the US, and we imported 63 billion. So we're already trading as a nation and a very healthy basis with the US, and have been for a number of years. Yes, as I mentioned, there's been some disputes. It was interesting that the longest running trade dispute in WTO history is around the large aircraft support, Airbus and Boeing. I think it's been going on for 17 years. But here we go. Our International Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, announced a week or so ago that she struck a deal with the US where tariffs that were retaliatory tariffs have been delayed for another 5 years, which is, I think, good news for our Kashmir machinery and Scotch whisky. I think Scotch whisky gets in everywhere whenever we're talking about trade. But it looks like, you know, that's good news. So there's already some agreements. So, you know, it's a very, interesting topic, and one we'll discuss. But what I'd like to do is begin by asking my panelists, who I'm delighted to welcome, Lucinda, Richard and Devesh, onto the panel, all with different experiences. And I'm going to ask each to introduce themselves and just talk a little bit as an overview of their own experience, either directly or indirectly with clients in respect to trade with the US. Devesh, as I can see you on my big screen at the moment, can I start with yourself?
Thanks, Lionel, and good morning, everybody. My name is Devesh Modi. I run the trade and working capital origination business for Barclays here in the UK. Trade and working capital essentially comprises a series of solutions which enable our clients to export and import goods and services across the world. And they kind of range from risk mitigation solutions like guarantees, often transactional instruments like letters of credit, but also short-term financing solutions like invoice discounting, supply chain financing, and receivables financing, which supports trade on an open account basis. US is a key market for our clients here in the UK. And I'll do a point about specific experience, while obviously we support our clients to export all over the world. By the very nature that it is the largest market, a lot of our activity is for clients supporting their US exports. As a bank, we also call ourselves a transatlantic bank with significant operations both in the US and in the UK. And hence there's a natural affinity for the US-UK trade. And I'm quite pleased to be on this panel and talk more about it in detail as we go along. Back to you, Linus, with that.
Thank you. Lucinda, can we move to you?
Morning, everyone. My name's Lucinda O'Reilly. I'm the founder of the International Trade Consultancy. However, this morning I am here because until quite recently, I was the exports director at EcoTile Flooring, who manufacture industrial flooring. When I decided that we needed to get into the US market, I did a lot of research. And because we are an SME, having found out a lot about the detail of the legal and tax environment out there, and also the costs associated with setting up an entity in the US, I came to the conclusion that we needed to go down the distributor route. We needed to find a partner in the States. So again, I did a lot of research, set up a lot of meetings, went out to the States, had a lovely 3 weeks traveling around the States, meeting lots of potential partners. And at the end of that time, natural selection, the partner I wanted to work with was also very keen to work with us, and it worked out very smoothly. I was told by a lot of people that you can't have one partner in the States. You need a distributor in each of the different states because they are so different. However, we were actually very lucky to find a flooring company that was nationwide and did have offices and staff in each of the different states. So it can be done if that's a route that you're thinking of taking. So yeah, lots to talk about. The challenges for us working with a distributor were overcoming local competition because there were manufacturers of similar products out there, the transport issues and FX issues as well. And I'm sure we'll get into all of that later. So back to you, Lionel.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And Richard, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So my name is Richard Paxton. I'm the CEO of a company called Paxton Scalp Cooling. Just a bit about what we do. Millions of people around the world, unfortunately, are diagnosed with cancer every single year. Many of those patients have something called chemotherapy. And one of those side effects that chemotherapy causes is hair loss. And that really has an impact on the patient, both psychologically and physically, affecting their well-being and ultimately outcomes in some cases. So we've actually developed a product after my mum had cancer back in the 90s, which is a scalp cooling device which is used to prevent or reduce chemotherapy-induced alopecia or hair loss. So really it's an opportunity that we have globally, and the US, of course, is a prime market. It's one of the biggest healthcare markets in the world, so really attractive for our organization. Our journey started in the USA when I first visited in about 2010. Although the company's been in operation about 20 years, we were always put off by the sheer size of America, of course, and also some of the hurdles that we had to think about overcoming. So again, I started in 2010. We carried out a successful clinical trial in the USA and gained FDA approval several years later in 2017. So significant investment and also time and resource. We now, though, operate in about 370 cancer centers in 40 states, and we support thousands of patients annually. But we're only just scratching at the surface, so huge opportunities. We've set up an infrastructure, of course, throughout the whole of the US to manage those 40 states. It's a big country. We've got personnel in a number of those states. We've got a small office out of Houston with DIT, in fact. And then we work with McKesson, who manage our 3PL, pharmacy, and other infrastructure. So actually the United States accounts for about 50% of our business now, and we expect it to probably take a much greater share in the next 2 to 3 years. So it really was a game changer for us eventually getting into America after, a long process, but a worthwhile one. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. It's an interesting comment that you made in terms of you're now operating in, I think, 40 states. Something, in my business, Trade Advisory Network, and I mean, we are advisors to banks and non-banks, in fact, anybody operating within the sort of trade and supply chain finance sector. And occasionally we deal and work with corporates who are, either looking at their current trading or future trading. And one of the comments that I recall from one of these corporates was they didn't realize how big the US was. And I think it's just an interesting one. I mean, for myself, who've been traveling around the US for years, dare I say, in my past as head of global trade at RBS Group, when we owned Citizens Bank in the US, it was pretty obvious how big the US is. But I think a lot of companies don't realize that you're talking about 50 plus states, you're talking about big geographical areas. And I think, Lucinda, it was interesting that you sort of touched on about the distributor side, which we will move on to later, where the advice was you probably need more than one, possibly because of the size of the country. But it's just an interesting observation that I captured. But I guess my first question, and I'm going back to the what seemed quite impressive trade stats. UK-US trade is healthy. I don't know if we can call it a special relationship. I'm not sure what that means. But it's healthy, and notwithstanding Brexit. I mean, I guess one of my questions is post-Brexit. Is there a natural scenario of more barriers because we're not part of the EU, or maybe less barriers? And in relation to that, there's a lot of talk. And in fact, I was doing some research yesterday. Every single item on US-UK trade was about a free trade deal. And whether we are, how long it's going to be, Biden's not in a hurry, et cetera, et cetera. But, do we need a free trade deal to really, start trading and exporting to the US? If we've got SMEs or companies, listening in today, should they be waiting for a trade deal? Are there too many barriers currently?
Personally, I think it depends on the sector that you're in. I mean, we see with all of these FTAs with everyone that we've done them with, some sectors really benefit from them, others feel very left out, that their needs haven't been considered. So in my experience, a lot of companies will just find a way of getting business done if that's what they want to do. If there's a market, for example, Richard's products, there's obviously a huge market for them out there. He hasn't waited for an FTA to be signed to get out there and just start doing it on the ground. And that would be my advice to anyone. If you feel that your company is at the point now where it's ready to launch in the States, just get on with it. Don't wait for an FTA, because it may not remove the barriers that you think are an issue to you.
I absolutely agree with Lucinda there. If there's a market already, then go for it. It's such a huge opportunity. I think see the FTA as a juicy bonus, I guess. It didn't prevent us from looking at it. Of course, I would love someone to turn around and say, now there's an FTA, we're going to harmonise some of those regulatory burdens that you've had to overcome. So it'd be great for me for new or future products or other benefits, and anything that makes trade easier. And as Lucinda said, not for all sectors, of course, some are affected and some aren't happy with the idea of FTAs. But I think where possible, like the healthcare industry, anything that removes some of those barriers will be a benefit. But if that's a reason for you to be not looking at the US, then you probably shouldn't be looking at the US anyway. I think just go for it now.
Sorry, and I was just going to add a point to Richard's point. I think his last statement was actually quite a good summary, that any benefits of a free trade agreement are likely to be marginal, and therefore that is not going to make or break your market your market prospects in the US. If the market already exists, then definitely now's the time to kind of enter the market. I'm also going to say that there are certain mutual recognition agreements in certain segments already in place, which means that in certain segments like telecom equipment, for example, or pharmaceutical manufacturing, there is already a regime where some of the regulations in the UK around manufacturing is already valid in the US, and therefore, while we do not have a free trade agreement, there is already some benefit in certain segment, although I must admit it's quite limited at this point in time. Another point quickly to add is that the consensus seems to be that any free trade agreement is more likely to benefit the US export industry as opposed to the UK export industry. The benefit for us will be segment specific and probably a bit more marginal. So I wouldn't definitely recommend waiting. If the market is in your sights, then go for it.
Thank you for that. And I think, I would agree. I think, there's always an excuse not to do something. And I think if you're a business and you're looking at markets, and of course, you know, the intention post-Brexit is that we can more easily enter new markets, but we have a US market that just, you know, is quite used to UK business. You know, there's a lot of investment. In fact, you know, another statistic I was looking at was the level of inward and outward investment, you know, but going both ways. And, you know, our biggest outward investment partner is the US. Our biggest inward investment partner is the US. So there's already a lot of relationship, I think, built with the US. But I was listening to one of the speakers yesterday, and I apologize to him because I can't remember his name. But his company, I think it was manufacturing outdoor play equipment, which you know, I think his comment was children around the world, you know, they might want different colors, but they like the same, you know, play equipment and what have you outside. And he mentioned about the US, and he said it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You know, it's a brilliant market, but boy, was it scary when they first got going and got moving into that market. And that sort of leads to, I guess, my second question to each of you, as to what do you see as the key considerations for a business looking to trade with a US counterpart? So Lucinda, can we start with yourself?
Yes, I think it comes down to values. When we were researching different distributors that we could go into business with, we needed a company that understood our ethos of quality, of doing things properly rather than trying to get them done quickly, of taking the time to understand. From our side, we needed to understand the market thoroughly. From their side, they needed to understand the USPs of our product, and really working together to make sure that everyone was on the same page, and we had a very clear plan as to what was going to happen when, and we were all happy with it and all agreed on the best way forward. It's very easy to get excited when you're thinking about launching in the States. You know, Americans, please, I apologize if I'm generalizing massively here, but in my experience, they're incredibly enthusiastic and complimentary about your business and your product, but you need to find someone who's going to really put in the groundwork and stick with you, and also someone who's going to be prepared to help you overcome any problems that arise, and isn't, you know, just going to say, oh, this is too difficult, I'm going to go off and do something else. So find a company that shares your values and how you want to operate and promote your business.
And just a follow-up question, if I may. So you mentioned in your previous work, you went down the distributor route. Mm-hmm. What influenced your decision to do that?
It was partly that the cost of actually setting up an entity in the States would have been quite prohibitive for us. We're a small company. Everyone ends up registering in Delaware, as far as I can tell. But then, you know, there are different sales taxes that you have to pay in every state that you sell to. So the legal and tax complexities were just overwhelming for a company of our size, and it made much more sense to partner with a distributor who was prepared to hold stock and do a lot of the marketing and the groundwork for us. And then in return, you know, we were providing an excellent product at a very good price, and helping them get into a market sector that they hadn't been in previously because they didn't really have an industrial flooring offering. So it was a good symbiotic relationship, but it takes a lot of time and research to find the right partner.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. Richard, I guess a question for you then. How did you enter the US?
So just on that research piece, I think everything that you're doing in the US needs a fair amount of research, just because it is vast. Because we're a medical device company, I think the most important thing for us when we first started to look at the market was what was the regulatory landscape? What did it look like? What did we need to do to actually fulfill the FDA requirements? And that took a bit of time. We also spoke and spent a lot of time developing relationships with the healthcare providers that could actually help us with potential clinical trials, and maybe even understand some of maybe the sort of consumer or patient barriers that may be expected. We had some safety concerns about our device all those years ago. So I think understand that is core, and understand what investment you've got to make. For me, and something I didn't do, is understand what the reimbursement pathway looked like. So how do we get paid? So anyone on this call that's in medical devices, figure out how you're going to get paid before you launch. Otherwise, you're like me and working in a self-pay environment, and it's still positive, but it's more difficult than having the insurers pay, of course, for the products. And speak to the FDA and find out what your competition is doing. So if you've got predicate devices in the market, that generally means it's going to be a bit easier for you. I think look at and understand whether you want to go direct to the market or use a distributor, as Lucinda said. Now, I was a bit naive and probably said we're going to go direct because it's a huge opportunity, not actually 100% understanding what that meant from a financial investment perspective. We've put millions into that country now, from clinical trials to setting up the right infrastructure, now to installing equipment in 370 cancer centres. So be prepared for it and be really sure that you've got the ability to raise that finance to do it properly. And it's not only what you do in the US, it's actually what you've got to do here in the UK to fulfill that business. Our team actually went from 20 odd people, and we're just at 60 people, and that's in about 3 or 4 years, and through a pandemic. So it's been quite an investment. And then, I know Lucinda touched on it, but make sure you look at the legal considerations, get a good advisor, look at taxation considerations, not just in the country, because every state is different and complex. It's a real pain, but don't be put off by it. But also transfer pricing policies. So if you are setting up an entity in the US, understand that you'll have different potential taxation rules and how you manage that process. So it's, I think, working with the right advisors to make sure you do the right thing from day one, and not sort of retrospectively look at it when you're already in the market, when you've probably made the mistakes, like me sometimes.
Thank you. I think we all make mistakes. It's hopefully they're not fatal ones.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, thank you for that. You know, and you've all touched on some points. I'm going to come to Divesh in a second on that, because you know the fact is, as you've rightly identified, do you go in? You know, do you put your own people on the ground? You might do to test the market and then use a distributor, or you use a distributor. And I guess the key with a distributor is finding one that doesn't just understand your values, but you can also trust, and you know they're going to do the job and represent you in the way that you wish to be represented. I think you both touched on some really key points around understanding state rules, you know, legal rules, the fact that the different states may work differently. And I'm guessing there that one aspect is about business culture. You know, I've certainly seen a lot of differences between East Coast and West Coast, you know, which also comes into it. But Divesh, when you're advising clients, you know, what are your key messages? If a client comes to one of your relationship managers tomorrow and talks about, you know, we're looking at opportunities in the US market, how do you sort of sit and help them as a bank? And you know, one of the questions we've got from the audience is around whether some sectors are easier to enter in the US than others. You know, if you've got any views on that, and I'll ask other panelists to come in on that question afterwards. So over to yourself.
Yeah, I think we lost a line in there for a second. I don't know if you guys.
Actually, Divesh, I'm having.
Sure, I didn't catch the.
Okay, Divesh, we're having, I think, some issues with your sound. So what we'll do is I'll ask Lucinda and Richard if you wouldn't mind just making any comment or observation around the question around some sectors easier to enter in the US than others. Lucinda?
That's a very interesting question. As a manufacturer, we didn't find it too difficult to enter. I mean, our industrial flooring, I hesitate to say this, but it was a pretty basic, simple product. You know, it wasn't complicated. So we didn't have the issues that Richard had in terms of needing to get it all retested to American standards. They were all, the distributors that we spoke with and the end users were happy to accept the British and European standards that we had already achieved. I think that does bring up something else that I wanted to mention, actually. Don't forget that British products do have an excellent reputation, not just in the States, but around the world. And that there is a high demand for them. So bear that in mind if you're thinking about launching in the States and anywhere else, really. You generally will be received quite warmly, and then you just need to do the research and find the right partner.
Thank you. Richard, have you got any thoughts?
I can only, I guess, echo what Lucinda said. Of course, you know, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, heavily regulated, but no matter what industry you're in, it's back to that, doing that research and really understanding, you know, what you need to do on a state-by-state basis, etc. I'll be wrong to talk about other industries that I haven't got experience in. I'm very focused on scalp cooling and medical devices, so I'm less in a position to talk more broadly.
Something Richard mentioned earlier is finding the right advisors before you get started. You need a good lawyer and you need a good accountant who is going to understand exactly what you want to do and where you want to do it, and who can advise you on the correct process for launching. Those two, and they may seem expensive, but a good lawyer and a good accountant will save you tens of thousands of pounds just by pointing you in the right direction and making sure that you don't make any of those mistakes that you inevitably will do just through not understanding the complexities of the local environment.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Divesh, I know we had some communication problems. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you, and apologies, my internet connection dropped, so I had to reconnect. I was just going to respond to your question, Lionel, about our clients. I was just going to address it in two parts.
I'm afraid, I think, Divesh, I think we've lost you again. Sorry, you keep coming on and off. Do you want to have one more go?
Yeah, let's try once again. Otherwise, I'll try and dial in via the mobile network. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's happening with the connection now. Can you hear me now, Dylan?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let's have one.
No, Divesh, unfortunately.
I was going to talk that we advance in the size of.
No, Divesh, unfortunately, your signal keeps going on us. So.
Okay. I don't want to try and dial in via the mobile. So let's see if that works.
Okay, so I mean, one aspect that I'll bring up again through the advice that we give when we're talking with corporates around trading with the US on the finance side is, of course, FX, you know, foreign exchange, and understanding, you know, if you know the terms of trade, but also, you know, the currencies that you're going to be invoicing in or being paid in. And if you're giving terms, you know, to think about how you protect yourself against movements in currency. And of course, we've seen, you know, I think the pound to the dollar, you know, went massively down, you know, on the Brexit side of things. And then, you know, it's gradually crept back up again. And I think it reached about 140, 142, and is now coming down again a little bit. But, you know, again, Lucinda and Richard, Lucinda, how did you guys protect yourselves in terms of FX risk?
We always gave our distributor prices in dollars. So they knew where they stood. And then it was a question of just keeping an eye on what the exchange rate was doing to make sure that we were within the you know, we were still going to be making margins if the exchange rate shifted a little bit. And, you know, our distributors kept an eye on what was happening as well. And they placed orders when it was in their interest to do so, you know, because they were ordering stock and then holding large quantities. So we both looked at it that way, but it's a very, very important conversation to have right at the beginning of the relationship as to how you're going to manage it, what their expectations are, what your expectations are. And it's about communication, you know, and then if something happens that was unforeseen and goes wrong and one party isn't happy, you've just got to talk about it and find a solution.
And Richard, I mean, you mentioned about, you know, making sure you understand how or when you're getting paid. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and also again the FX side?
Yeah, I'll touch on FX first. We set up an entity out of Delaware and an office in Houston. So what we have to do is follow sort of strict transfer pricing rules, and what I mean by that is it's at arm's length transactions to our company in the US. We actually have all the forex risk here in the United Kingdom. So that volatility over the period of us trading in the US has been quite high. One of the things that has affected us mostly is that actually the US company owes the UK company, quite a large amount of debt. So we have millions of dollars worth of debt in our US company. And we get all that forex hit. And because we can't put certain hedging strategies in place because of the nature of the debt and the unknown of when it will be paid back, that really hits our P&L on a quarterly basis. And, you know, you've got movements of about $500,000 at some points, which is incredible. But I guess then that's your right messaging to your stakeholders so they understand what that is, and it's not an overall too difficult a risk. But I think those open discussions and managing that forex as much as you can is really important, and to maintain your margins. When I talked about getting paid, what I mean is from a reimbursement perspective. So we changed our business model slightly in the United States. So rather than selling capital equipment, which we've done most of our business lives here at Paxton in the UK, we switched to an actual pay-per-patient model. So what we do is we install our capital equipment into those cancer centres around the United States, and then there's actually a charge per use of the device. So a patient at the moment will pay to use the device, and ultimately it's a better business model. It allows more recurring revenues, more sustainable for the future, and reinvestment back into the technology. So what we really want to see is actually not the patient paying, because that is not equitable, but we actually want the insurers to pay. So not just the commercial insurers, the private health insurers, but also the government insurers, which is CMS, Medicare, Medicaid. What I didn't do all those years ago when we first started looking at the market is that reimbursement pathway. I focused on the regulatory stuff, but forgot about getting paid. Not totally, but you know, 3 years in, 4 years in, and we're still a self-pay business, still generating decent amounts of revenue, but actually that ability for the insurers to pay would be a real game changer for our business. So I urge smaller medical device businesses like us, big ones will already know this, to make sure you run a dual track, reimbursement, regulatory, and hopefully it all comes together when you launch, where you're getting paid by the right people, which is, yeah, much better.
That's interesting. I mean, it's a sign of success when you've got all those dollars, dare I say, stuck in the US, You know, it's better than having none.
True, I hope. I hope it's a sign.
But Divesh, you're back again. We're going to give you another try because so we're fair on yourself to make some points.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lionel. And I've kind of now connected through my phone line, so hopefully I'm coming through okay.
Yeah.
And we won't get cut off. So I was actually going to make a couple of points. I think starting with the last point that Richard made. I think in terms of the kind of the perception of risk, not quite the reimbursement mechanism, but my point was about the perception of risk. The US being a developed market, most of the trade ends up happening on open account, as opposed to some of the emerging markets where you tend to use more risk mitigation instruments. The kind of the perception of risk is relatively low, and therefore a lot of the trading happens on open account, and the risk of failure of payment is relatively low, which is another kind of benefit or another positive from a market perspective. I was going to make a couple of points when I got cut off, so maybe slightly a different narrative. But one point I was going to make about what makes the US market particularly attractive for customers, for our clients, is really the perception of the goods and services manufactured in the UK. We did a survey around 3 months back where we spoke to around 10,000 customers, end users spread across the world, and amongst all the Western markets, Germany, France, Spain, and the US, amongst all of these markets, the US consumer was the most positive about goods manufactured in the UK. And this is down to the perception of quality. This is down to the perception of being innovative, as well as familiarity and tradition. These 4 aspects came out in a very, very strong fashion. Around 1/3 of the customers were actually willing to pay a premium for a service or a good or goods manufactured in the UK, as opposed to manufactured elsewhere. Now, that is a big proportion of your client base that is actually willing to give you an extra value, an extra margin, just because of the perception of quality that we have. Now, sure enough, this perception is even better in some of the emerging markets like, let's say, China or India or the Middle East. But it is significantly worse in countries like Germany or France. And I think that should be kind of taken into account when you are, on the one hand, looking at US as a market and kind of getting daunted by the size of it and the kind of the complexity of the rules. But for everything that is complex, there is a premium attached, which can actually make it worthwhile for our clients. And the final point I was going to make was, again, there's a lot of reference made to the size of the market and the different states. And what we found clients often do is to tackle the market. I guess it's an obvious thing to do, not so much as state by state, as probably region by region. You probably talk about the Midwest as a market. You probably talk about the kind of the part of the East Coast as a market. And I think that probably ends up dividing the market in more manageable chunk sizes, which makes it a little less daunting. But the attractiveness of the whole market continues to be a key theme for our clients. Lionel.
Thank you, and it's nice to be able to hear you clearly now, which is great. Thank you for that. You touched on a couple of things. I'm looking at some of the questions coming in as well, and the fact that we've only got 6 minutes left now. But there was one thing that you mentioned around the standards and the view of the US consumer. And I've seen this, like you said, around the world. A lot of the work we do in Asia and what have you, people like to buy British. What I've also found when I've spoken to various manufacturers and exporters in the Far East, and I talked to them about meeting whether it used to be EU standards or US standards. Was there a lot of difference? And the answer was, depending on the sector, there were always differences, but both have pretty tough standards. And, you know, one of the questions, I guess, that I'm seeing on the chat was around the efforts being made to have closer regulatory and standards alignment between the US and the UK. But, you know, everyone always, when you talk about US, you know, the chicken always comes out, chlorinated chicken, oh, it's terrible or what have you. I have to be honest, I have no idea if I've eaten it. I've had chicken in the US, you know, but I presume I have. But there is a perception that the standards in the US are lower. Lucinda, Richard, you know, from your experience, you know, and I guess Richard with the FDA, you would have seen directly scenarios. Are their standards lower? You know, it might be different, but are they as tough or as demanding as what we are used to? Lucinda, do you want to?
Sorry.
All right, Richard, you begin.
No, apologies. No, Lucinda, go on. I
would say that American standards for the product that I was selling out there were absolutely comparable to standards in the UK and Europe, definitely.
Richard?
And from my perspective, the FDA is known as the gold standard. So if you look at that from a sort of global perception, that is the sort of, yeah, it's up here in terms of what you've got to do to get your medical device, your pharmaceutical through. But again, that's one industry. But working there, I feel, you know, standards are high.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, Lionel. I think the standards, they will tend to be different for different sectors. So by its very nature, we'll probably have a situation where certain sectors, you know, might be different, like you said. But I haven't come across a situation where the standards there are significantly lower than the standards in the UK or more difficult, you know, from the perspective.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And that's been, I have to say, my experience. I think you know, a lot of noise is made around the free trade agreement and is around, you know, we're letting in the US, you know, it's going to affect certain industries, which it probably will do, but affect standards and what have you. You know, I'm pretty sure there are efforts on a governmental basis to have closer alignment on regulatory and standards alignment. But I think going back to what was said before by all of you is you've got to do your research, you know, before you enter the market. And I think that's always going to be I guess the key message. I'm conscious that we have 2 minutes left. There are a number of questions, so I'll ask the organisers to take the questions away, you know, and we can answer them privately or what have you. But I think the message that I'm getting from everybody is, you know, don't wait for any free trade agreement, just get on and research, do your homework. When necessary, take the legal advice. I have to say my experience is the UK lawyers are generally cheaper than US lawyers, but take the advice and do the research. And certainly, I mean, Divesh left us at one point, but dare I say it's, you know, if you've got a wonderful problem of having too much money sitting in the US and not back in the UK, I know the banks have wonderful cash management tools to help everyone. So I thought I'd say that on Divesh's behalf. But I'm going to ask, and I guess the final question really from me, because we're out of time, is, you know, focusing on everything that you've said today. What do each of you think that either you or your clients have got right, and what did you get wrong? What's the one thing you wish you hadn't done, or the one thing you were so delighted to have done? Lucinda, let's start with yourself.
I think I would say perhaps we weren't ambitious enough. We probably could have pushed faster and harder and made more of an impact in the market if we just had the confidence to do so. But as I say, it was our first experience in the States, and the partner that we were working with was so much bigger than us. I think I had a bit of an inferiority complex maybe, and we could have done a lot more quickly. So have faith in yourself and go for it.
So Richard.
So what I think we did well was, yeah, I think we made the right investments and we did think big, but we built some really strong relationships in those early years of understanding the market, and that sort of really fast-tracked us when we actually finally got approval. And then what we didn't do right, and I've touched on it before, is the reimbursement piece. Figure out how you're going to get paid if you've got a medical device.
Well, I was going to just say that the clients of ours who've done well are the clients who've committed to the market, in the sense that it is a large market. It has got its complexity. There's a big price at the end of it, but it's not something that you can do from the side of your desk, as both Lucinda and Richard have very clearly said. And that's what we found with our clients. It's a market that will need research, need investment. But if you're prepared to do that, it's a huge market. There's lots of information available. There's lots of support available, but it has to be driven by the business itself. And again, like Lucinda said, it's just a market that one has to kind of go after.
Lovely, thank you for that. Panel, I'd like to thank you, each of you. I mean, the fact that there are about 5 or 6 unanswered questions, indicates the interest that everybody who's been listening has taken, in this subject and really as to what you've been saying. So I'd like to thank you all, and Divesh, sorry you had some issues, but it was great to get you back in. And I think the message from this panel is, don't delay, do your research, make your investment, and the US market is definitely one to go for. Thank you.